I'm guessing you probably can't say, but there's a report out there that Clayton's going to start in the game. Is there anything you can shed light on that?
I know people are going to make a big deal of who starts the game. I don't really see it that way. I think, competitions at every position are going to come down to the final cuts, and that's the nature of this business. It's the reality of the training camp. So excited to see those guys go out and play at a high level, and expect them to do that regardless who's in the game first.
What have you seen so far in that battle?
Well, I think you saw the game day operation. I thought it's been pretty clean. I thought the ball's going where it should be. Certainly there's some plays we'd like to have back. It takes 11 guys to operate an offense, so I think a lot of that's not always on their performance one way or the other, good and bad. So a lot of it for the quarterback is decision making, operation, and are we doing what we should be at the position? So we've done some things well. I think there's certainly things we got to clean up for both guys, and that's going to be true throughout the year for everybody on this roster.
In general, obviously as a team, whatever team you are, you're hoping you don't have to turn to a backup quarterback. But you've been in the league long enough. How crucial is it to have a guy that you feel comfortable with if you do have to do that?
Yeah, it's big. I think that's true at every position. I think the reality of the NFL game is that guys get hurt. It's unfortunate, but it's real. At the quarterback position, I think, 60-plus starters last year in the National Football League. So you want everybody on that roster, if they have a jersey, to be ready to go, ready to operate the offense, ready to give us the best chance to win. I think that's preached in the meeting room as a team. I think it's certainly preached by me as an offense, and that's got to be our mindset because it's real. It happens.
What have you tasked the offensive linemen who are seeing time between last week and this week's game?
I think certainly we got to eliminate the penalties, and a lot of those, that can be technique, it can be anticipation of assignment, little things like that. But I thought the effort and energy was there. And I think that's the number one thing we're going to look for from that group and all those groups is are we putting everything into it? And I think that group really is. So been pleased with that. And I think we just need to clean up some of the details.
With the starters not playing, how good of a sense do you have of what it's going to look like in Buffalo?
Good. I think certainly, yes, they're not playing in the, it's been 2 days they haven't played. Every other day at training camp, they've been out there, competing and putting themselves on tape and trying to earn those roles. So I think we have a good sense of who does what and how they fit, but I do think that those roles evolve throughout the course of training camp and even into the season. But very pleased with where those guys are at. I think they've really committed themselves. So it's been a good training camp from that standpoint.
With Yeldon coming along with you from Cleveland at the same time, not to say he just followed you, but what have you seen from Yeldon?
I followed him.
What was your reaction to his extension, and what have you seen as far as growth from him at that position?
Certainly excited for him. I think one of the things that, with him and a lot of guys on this roster is he does it the right way. He takes the job extremely seriously, works very hard from an attitude, effort, and tangible standpoint is certainly what we want to be about. So anytime you see a guy get rewarded for that, it's exciting. I think at the end of the day, and I said this as a coach, I want everybody in that room to get a new contract and a lot of money. That's my goal coaching these guys. I know that's not the reality of the NFL, but so always feel good about that. And then, I think from his standpoint, been pleased with where he's at, obviously. But there's always going to be little things that we're tweaking and changing and trying to work on to get him ready for the season.
JG mentioned last week both sides of the ball starting to form that identity, things they do well. How much more do you have at your disposal in year two? Just in the scheme, the system, how much more are you able to dial up potentially?
Again, and we've talked about this a little bit, I don't think it changes dramatically. I know it's hey, year two, we're just going to do a ton more or a whole lot different. I think there's some things that you get to quicker because you don't have to necessarily have the conversations about exactly what we're doing or how we're doing it. It's hey, we've done that. We haven't done it in a couple weeks. Let's pull it. Let's get it back in. Rather than hey, this is the first time we've done this. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. Let's talk about those things. So I think it brings a little bit of fluidity in terms of jumping back and forth to things you've done in the past, I guess. But I don't think it has a wholesale change of the offense.
Some of the positives and negatives you took away from the first team's offense's performance last week in joint practices?
I think you got to see some of those one-on-one matchups that are maybe different than what we're getting against our defense, where they may be talented or not as talented. We start to see guys, play different people, different techniques. So I thought that was really good just to get an evaluation of certain players. I think that was good. And then from a scheme perspective, not that we're necessarily game planning or scheming it up as if we're going to go play them in a regular season game, but you do get to start to see, all right, hey, we like this versus this coverage against our defense. It didn't look quite as clean against that coverage from them. Or, hey, actually, it's something we thought we weren't as good at because of what we're getting during the week in training camp. It looked really good versus that look or that front. So I think those were kind of the main two takeaways from my standpoint coming out of those practices.
The running backs room, it seems like every back has performed well camp or preseason games they've had the opportunity. They all kind of have a little bit of a different skill set. The final decisions come from Monty, JG, but as we get closer to the cuts, someone who likes to run the ball, how do those discussions take place on if everybody is doing something well, figuring out who makes most sense long-term for the season.
I think you just hit on it. My job, and I've said this to Monty and JG, is to make their job as hard as possible. Right, like that's my goal as a coach, as an offensive coordinator. So like I want those decisions to be really hard because I do want all those guys at every position playing at a really high level. So been pleased, as you said, those guys have been really productive in games, at practice, understanding what we're trying to accomplish, being great in protection, catching the ball out of the backfield. So that's been good to see, and I think want that to continue. And at the end of the day, decisions have to get made. But I'm glad I don't have to make those.
Have you seen any separation from those guys, or is it still a pretty tight competition between those guys?
Yeah, I think it's very tight. And I think there's a number of positions where we could say that about. And I think that the reality is they all do different things well. And I think that's what makes them dynamic as players, and it's what makes that decision so hard at times.
With a guy like Christian Jones, he was dinged a couple times last game. What's the message to him after that?
I think I kind of hit on it a second ago, but the focus goes back to all right, it's one thing, hey, we can just yell at you for creating a penalty, but it's not like he was he knows it's a penalty, But I think he did a really good job of not kind of going in the tank, continuing to bounce back, continuing to, hey, I got to play the next rep, worry about the next series. And I think as you watch the tape, it's all right, why did we get ourselves in that position? Was it footwork? Was it hand placement? Was it understanding of what was about to happen on the other side of the ball? So I think we've tried to coach up on some of those things and certainly move forward. And, there's also times where you look and say, hey, they called it, but I don't know if I tell you anything different, So I think that's the reality of some of that stuff as well.
Clayton told us that he's really confident how in the pre-snap matches up with what he's seen post-snap. What else have you seen year two with him? Where has he grown the most, do you think?
I think that's probably one of the biggest things, just the pace of play is faster. He's making decisions faster, in and out of the huddle, he's quicker. The operation, he's not thinking. And, for year one, which is true for a lot of rookies, certainly at the quarterback position, is you can almost watch them think as they play, which is not ideal. And so I think going into year two, it's a lot more anticipation, a lot more quick twitch, reaction, rather than oh, they did this, now I do that. It's no, I think they're about to do this, I'm going to be ready to do that. And I think that's really helped speed up his process and allow him to play at a good level.
Along those lines, does the fact that Desmond wasn't here last year, does that give Toon a leg up because he has been here in the offense 1 year, or because of Desmond's experience, does that kind of even out?
I don't see it as a leg up one way or the other. I think there's a lot of different ways to play that. We're going to make a decision based on what they do while they're here. And I think Des is a pro, as you said. He's played a lot of ball. I think certainly he came in here and learned the offense very quickly and put himself in position to be part of this competition. So I don't see that really factoring into it.
As a play caller and the OC, how do you want 3 quarterbacks in the roster just in case? Do you want 2? What goes into your thinking in terms of, I know it's not ultimately your call, but kind of what's your preference?
And that's the best part about it, is I don't have to make that decision. No, I think certainly if you have guys that play the position at a high level, you absolutely want them on the roster. We talked about it. 60-plus guys started, so you never know who you're going to need at what point. So there's so many things that go into that conversation, and it's usually not just about that position. It's about a number of other positions and how it fits the roster. But that's going to be a job for Monty and JG to work through here over the next couple days, really, because we got about a week left before those decisions get made. But certainly, kind of like the running back competition, I want to make that conversation hard on them and make sure that they feel really confident those guys are ready to go, regardless who's called in to play in the game.
Trey Benson, go ahead.
What has surprised you most about Xavier Weaver, undrafted, and seems like he's been practicing and performing well?
Yeah, I think one of the things that stood out about him is, and this is a nice thing to see, especially from an undrafted rookie, is he's kind of unflappable. The lights are never too bright, regardless of what he's asked to do, what the situation is. He's going to go in the game, and whether it's the practice rep or the fourth quarter in a critical situation, he's kind of the same guy. Never too high, never too low. The moment's never too big for him. So I think that's really critical. And then I think the next piece of it is just trying to figure out, all right, hey, now this is who I am. This is the league. How do I go out and carve my role out for myself? And I think he's done a good job of embracing that challenge and need that to continue.
Greg Dortch expressed that he'd want to remain a part of the return game, even with an expanded role in offense, and it looks like he's going to get that. What's your thoughts on that? You talked to Jeff about potentially, if he's going to play a big role with your offense, to maybe scale back what he does on special teams?
I'll never ask Jeff to scale anything back on special teams. Certainly, I think those conversations happen. A lot of it's him just saying, hey, I'm trying to get an idea of how much he's going to factor in, how many plays he's going to play. I don't want to overwork a guy. I don't want to get a guy hurt by overuse, all those different things. But I think, as you said, if a guy's dynamic with the ball in his hands, whether we're throwing it to him on offense or he's getting it in a kickoff or punt return situation, to me, that's a play with him with the ball in his hand, and a player that kind of dynamic, you certainly want that more often than not. So, those are conversations that will continue throughout the season, I'm sure.
You mentioned not having to make the decision on the quarterback, but overall and generally, how much does Jonathan collaborate with you and the assistants and all that, just getting your thoughts on different players as you come down to these decisions on Tuesday?
Yeah, I think a lot. I mean, certainly he wants our opinions of, all right, where do we think the guy's at? What is his role on the team? How does he help us? And how do we, see that as, moving forward? So those are conversations that I think you're having almost daily throughout the offseason, throughout training camp. Even during the season, as injuries come up and all the roster management that goes into the week-to-week of an NFL season. So it's been a lot of fun to be a part of those conversations. And certainly I've learned a lot from working with those two guys because I think they're pretty good at it.
From your perspective, what have you seen from the relationship between Jonathan and Kyler?
I think it's really strong. I think they're very similar in their competitiveness, in terms of their love of football, in terms of the way they see the game, if that makes sense. So I do. I think there's a lot of mutual respect there. I think they really like being around each other, and certainly I think Kyler likes to watch him coach, and I know JG likes to watch Kyler play. So it's been fun to see that relationship kind of grow here over the last year and a half.
What's the benefit of having head coach quarterback harmony?
I think it's really important. I think, at the end of the day, those are arguably two of the most important people to your football operation. And having those people on the same page, move in the same direction from a culture standpoint, I think is really big.
Along the same lines, how important is it? Sometimes all teams do it differently, certainly, but having the head coach who's not the offensive coordinator, all that, so there's that kind of separation. How important do you think that is, especially with Kyler?
I don't think it makes a huge difference one way or the other. I think a lot more of it's about personal relationships and how you interact with people. Certainly in Cleveland, Kevin Stefanski was head coach and play caller. I thought it worked really well there. I think Kyler and JG have a great relationship, and I think it's a good situation here. So I think that really depends on so many different factors to get the most out of both the player and the team.
Nick has expressed, or shared rather, that he likes to trash talk the offensive players at practice, and players have backed him up. Do you do the same with defense?
I am typically not a trash talker, but if enough trash is talked, I will respond. I'd say that's generally my philosophy on that. I like to let the players' energy, and I say this to the guys, ultimately the identity of our offense, I want to come from the players. I do think it's a players' league. If they're going to if that's going to be our identity, I'll be right there with them. But I think there's a line there that I got to toe in terms of hey, here's what's acceptable, here's what's out of line, because there's also the reality of when you get on games of getting penalties and stepping out of line. So it's been fun. I think there's certainly a time in training camp where you're just a little sick of hearing the same guys talk and going against the same people. I think that's real. We're getting close to that point now. But no, I have a ton of respect for Nick. I love when he starts talking trash, and I love to see those guys respond to him. It's a lot of fun.
What does the Drew Petzing trash talk sound like?
Oh, it's probably terrible. I couldn't even imagine what it comes out like. I hope it's never on camera. That's really what I'm hoping for right now.
A lot's been talked about the improved depth on the roster as we get towards next Sunday. Can you see that there's going to be a lot of more tough decisions this year than there were last year?
Yeah, certainly. I think, the better your roster gets, there's going to be players that you want to keep that you can't, just on nature of sheer numbers and the way that the NFL roster works. So I think the better you are, the harder those conversations get, and I think we're certainly starting to see that this year relative to last year.
Zay Jones flashed a couple times, those joint practices. What have you seen so far from him?
I think kind of what you've seen throughout his career, very reliable target, plays the game at a very high level. As we talked about kind of quarterback quick decision making, he's seen a lot. So there's not a lot of things that surprise him. So he's very reliable from that standpoint. I think that trust for a quarterback, that trust for a coordinator is big. So really been pleased with what he's kind of put out there and how he's carrying himself in the building.
How would you describe his football IQ?
High. I think he jumped in, learned the offense, was ready to go. There was very little lag time there, which at the receiver position, if you played the game as long as him at this level, it's probably the case because guys that don't have that tend to struggle to stick around.
How did you think Marvin competed against their starting corners in Indy?
Good. Again, I think it was a great test for him that, you get a lot of one-on-one reps, a lot of man reps, which is nice because obviously in a game you might get one or two when the right call is called, but in practice you can manufacture, hey, we're going to go 8 minutes of one-on-ones. And, I thought he did some really good things at the line of scrimmage. Certainly his ball skills showed up, so I was really pleased with that.
Yesterday, Yelda talked about how confident he is in his group and the 5 guys that are starting now. How much does, when you have that as a coordinator and play caller, how important is that feeling that you have that line that enables you to do the things you want to do on offense?
Huge. And I've said that to those guys probably, more times than they'd like to hear. To me, the game is won or lost with those 5 guys, almost entirely at times. Whether we want to run or pass the ball, both of those things require those 5 guys to do their job at a high level. So certainly been pleased with where those guys are at, and we're going to keep pushing them here as we get going towards the season.